Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Am I audible to the last row? Yes? All right. Okay. Thank you very much for staying up all the way till the end of the session today. I'm Dr. Kishan Devarajan, the chairperson for the upcoming session. I'm sure it has been a long day for you all, and it's almost 5, reaching to the end of the day's conference. The next topic, preventing the perfect storm with lifestyle medicine. The topic itself is interesting, where we're bringing treatment back home, where lifestyle, we're healing from within. And our speaker to address this topic is one of the most apt person to touch upon this topic, sharing with us is Dr. Sivaneswaran Poobalasingam, who's a pioneer in this field in our country, one of the first board-certified lifestyle medicine physician in Malaysia. Dr. Siva's clinical expertise is mainly in the management of stress and lifestyle-related diseases, diabetes, mellitus, hypertension, eating disorders, so on and so forth. He is the founder and the president of the Malaysian Society of Lifestyle Medicine, which is affiliated to the Lifestyle Medicine Global Alliance. He is also the founder and the current president of the Amrita Integrative and Lifestyle Medicine Center. He is the Malaysian representative to the International Council of Lifestyle Medicine. So, without further ado, we'll hand it over to Dr. Siva. He, unfortunately, due to unforeseen reasons, is unable to join us here physically, but he's available for us on the virtual platform for his sharing on this insightful topic. So, over to you, Dr. Siva.
Greetings. Welcome to our session on preventing the perfect storm with lifestyle medicine. I'm Dr. Sivaneswaran Poobalasingam, and today we are going to be discussing about how we can prevent the perfect storm not only during COVID-19 but also in future pandemics. Now, COVID-19 infection caused by the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2, which is a new strain of the coronavirus, first discovered in Wuhan in December 2019. Now, in a span of 2 years, we've seen various variants, including the Delta and the current trending variant, which is the Omicron. Now, this virus has spread around the world, and more than 458 million people have been infected thus far, with 6 million deaths. And in Malaysia, we have 3.82 million cases of coronavirus, with 33,807 deaths. Now, this virus has an incubation period of up to 2 weeks, depending on the variant, and it spreads via droplets. Its symptoms include fever, dry cough, fatigue, and difficulty in breathing. It can lead to viral pneumonia and acute respiratory distress syndrome. Now, older adults and people with chronic conditions have an increased risk of morbidity and mortality. Now, an uncontrolled COVID-19 infection can trigger what we call a cytokine storm. Now, in a cytokine storm, what happens is that there is overproduction of pro-inflammatory cytokines and chemokines, such as the tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin-1 beta, and interleukin-6 by the immune system. This will result in multi-organ damage and coagulation abnormalities, which can lead to thromboembolic events. Now, clinically, it can present as a stroke, heart attack, cardiac arrest, embolism in the lung, comatose, and Kawasaki syndrome in children. Now, our immune system has 2 components, the innate immunity and the adaptive immunity. Now, when we have a dysfunctional immune response, what happens is that the innate immunity, the component that comes into play when a person is exposed to an infection, is unable to inhibit viral replication and eliminate infected cells. Now, this will lead to an exacerbated inflammatory response, which will lead to a cytokine storm. Now, this takes place at the transition point between innate and adaptive immune responses. Now, here, either a protective immune response develops or the immune response fails. If the immune response fails, then this leads to the aggravated inflammatory response. When a person has COVID-19 with a pre-existing NCD, now this sets the stage for what we call a perfect storm. Now, in a study published in the Lancet Global Health, it is suggested that 1 in 5 people are at an increased risk of severe COVID-19 should they become infected, mostly due to underlying NCDs. Now, why does the perfect storm take place in people who have NCDs? Now, people who have NCDs have a dysfunctional immune system to start off with. They have an impaired immune response to infection. Hence, the innate immunity is not able to manage the infection, which leads to an aggravated inflammatory response. Now, people with NCDs also have a low-grade inflammation, which is already ongoing. So an aggravated inflammatory response with the backdrop of a low-grade inflammation, this then accentuates that inflammation. Hence, this is why the perfect storm takes place in people who have chronic diseases. Now let's look at some data of COVID-19 in people who have NCDs. And let's look at some of the risk factors. Now, COVID-19 and diabetes, risk factor for severity of the disease, there's a twofold increase in patients who have diabetes in intensive care. Now, risk factor for hospitalization, 12 to 16% in patients who have diabetes. There's a threefold increase in mortality in patients with diabetes. Now, moving on to hypertension. Hypertension is the most common comorbidity in COVID-19, and there's a twofold increase in severe cases in ICU. The UK Biobank data shows that being overweight increases the risk of COVID-19 by 44%. And a report that included 5,700 patients with obesity in New York showed that 41.7% of COVID-19 hospitalized patients were people who were obese. So we know that a background of NCDs, then coupled with an infection, leads to the perfect storm. Now, this is not only for COVID-19, but this is the same pattern that we have seen in the past 20 years with previous pandemics such as SARS, MERS, and influenza A. So how do we prevent the perfect storm, not only for COVID-19, but for future pandemics? Now, the first thing that we want to do, of course, is to stem the rise of chronic diseases such as hypertension, heart disease, hyperlipidemia, obesity, diabetes, and more. And at the same time, you want to fortify your immune system. Now, enhancing your immune system must take into account having good gut microflora. The gut microflora has both good and bad bacteria. Now, optimally, it should be 70% good and 30% bad, because the gut microflora plays an important role in our immunity, which we will discuss a little down the road. Now, the good news is that 80% of lifestyle diseases can be prevented, managed, and reversed, and our immune system can be enhanced. So how are we going to do that? Now, lifestyle medicine is one answer towards this question. So lifestyle medicine is an evidence-based approach to preventing, treating, and even reversing diseases by replacing unhealthy behavior patterns with positive ones. And lifestyle medicine promotes the use of a predominantly plant-based diet, regular physical activity, restorative sleep, stress management, avoidance of tobacco, moderate alcohol use, and positive social connectivity. Now, we know that diets high in saturated fats, sugar, and refined carbohydrates contribute to the prevalence of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and other chronic diseases. Now, this type of diet also increases the risk of severe COVID-19 pathology and mortality. So we want to select a diet that is predominantly plant-based, which is rich in fiber and nutrient dense, high in antioxidants, high in vitamins and minerals, not a diet that is low in fiber and calorie rich, nutrient empty. All right. Now, what kind of diet gives us that? So if you eat a lot of fiber, whole grains, some small amount of unsaturated fats, fruits, vegetables, legumes. Now, these are all high in antioxidants, phytochemicals, and they are anti-inflammatory in nature. So dietary patterns where there's high consumption of this type of food, such as the plant-based diet and the Mediterranean diet, reduce the risk of chronic diseases and helps to enhance the immune function. Now, a plate that is recommended, all right, a plant-based plate should consist of half the plate should be filled with fruits and vegetables, which are high in fiber, which are high in vitamins and minerals. And a quarter of the plate should be filled with proteins, but not only animal proteins. Now, the problem is many people only eat animal proteins. All right, it's fine. You can have a small amount of animal proteins as a condiment. Now, the rest of it should be plant-based proteins such as the legumes, soy-based products like tofu, tempeh, all right, and some nuts and grains. And you want whole grains as well, complex grains. Now, why do we want plant-based proteins? Because plant-based proteins also are high in fiber. Now, high fiber foods, when digested by the gut microflora, help to produce short-chain fatty acid, and this helps to produce butyrate, which plays a role in preventing and managing chronic diseases. Now, high intake of fruits and vegetables and whole wheat has been inversely associated with the risk of inflammation. More fruits, more vegetables, more whole wheat lower the risk of inflammation. Not only that, it also helps to modulate the immune response. And of course, a plant-based diet reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, obesity, diabetes. Now, evidence also suggests that a diet which has large amounts of fruits and vegetables with little meat consumption can substantially reduce the risk of venous thromboembolism. The levels of homocysteine and other clotting factors are influenced by food intake. Okay? Now, in a study published in Brain Behavior and Immunity by Butler and team, it is suggested that peripheral inflammation caused by COVID-19 may have long-term consequences, and neuroinflammatory mechanisms can be compounded by an unhealthy diet. Hence, eating anti-inflammatory diets can help to reduce peripheral inflammation. Otherwise, these peripheral inflammation can lead to chronic medical conditions such as dementia and other neurodegenerative diseases. Now, let's move on to our digestive tract. A quick overview on our digestive tract. The large and small intestines are 25 feet long. The total surface area is that of a tennis court. Hence, it can store a large amount of partially digested putrefying matter and toxic chemicals. Now, our colon is our most important detoxification organ. So it is very important to take care of our the health of our colon. Now, if we look at this slide, and if we look at the upper picture, all right, now this indicates food transit time of a person who's on a standard American diet, which is basically a low fiber diet. Now, here it's of course stated the standard American diet, but it could be a standard Malaysian diet as well. All right, a standard Malaysian diet where basically we are consuming high amounts of carbohydrate, high amounts of meat, very little vegetables. Now, the National Health and Mobility Survey 2019 indicated that 95% of Malaysians do not eat the recommended 5 servings of fruits and vegetables. All right, so now assuming today is Saturday and the colon is only evacuating Wednesday's dinner, so it's holding Thursday's meals, it's holding Friday's meals and Saturday's meals. All right, now look at the transit time for a high fiber diet. Okay, here again, assuming it's Saturday, it's evacuating Friday's meal, so it's only holding 1 meal from Friday and Saturday's meals. All right, so there's a huge difference between the transit time of whether a person is on a low fiber diet or a high fiber diet. Now, why is that important? Okay, one of the important things about this is that if you have a very poor transit time and you hold a lot of putrefying matter, toxic matter, what's going to happen is that you're going to have gut dysbiosis. You're going to have gut dysbiosis where the gut flora, the proportion of the good to bad bacteria is disturbed. Now, then you are not going to be able to have a good immune system, right? Now, the gut microbiome plays an important role in human health and disease. So, the gut microbiome is healthy, a person is healthy. The gut microbiome is unhealthy, then this leads to diseases. Now, a large portion of our immune system is in the gut, and that is our first line of defense. So the gut is where the bacteria meets the immune system. So the bacteria influences the immune system. So if the gut microbiome is healthy, right, then it is able to respond correctly when faced with infections, and it helps the immune system to maintain a proper homeostasis. Okay, and not only that, the human microbiota also plays a role in helping to prevent or manage chronic diseases such as diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, and more. Now, talking about nutrition, so one particular nutrient maybe we can talk a little bit about is vitamin D. Now, vitamin D is produced on exposure to sunlight. At that point, it is inactive, converted to the active form in the liver and kidney. Now, food sources of vitamin D are limited. So we need to expose ourselves to the sunlight, right? And some of the food sources are milk, dairy products, and mushroom. Now, as a person ages, this decreases the ability to produce vitamin D. Now, what is the function or the benefit of vitamin D? It is immunomodulatory, it inhibits inflammation, and it prevents the excessive expression of inflammatory cytokines, including interleukin-6 and TNF-alpha. Now, in a retrospective study done at the University of Chicago, it was done on patients where vitamin D levels were measured a year before being tested for COVID-19. And what they found was that patients who had vitamin D deficiency, which was not treated, were twice as likely to test positive for COVID-19 infection compared to patients who had sufficient levels of the vitamin. Now, in another study, it was found that there was a negative correlation between vitamin D levels and mortality and morbidity. So, lower the levels of vitamin D, higher the risk of morbidity and mortality. And here, this vitamin D levels were measured in 20 European countries, and vitamin D levels were severely low in the aging population, in particular in Spain, Italy, and Switzerland. Now, I'm going to move on to exercise. But before we start talking about physical activity, I want to emphasize something. You can't out-exercise a bad diet, all right? So you can't be very into fitness, but you have a poor diet. Now, I have patients who will walk up Gussing Hill as a form of exercise. But the problem is when they come down and they will head to Raju's restaurant, it's a popular restaurant in PJ, and they will have their roti canai and teh tarik, or nasi lemak and teh tarik. Now, I'm very okay about people doing this, or even I myself may do this if it is a social activity. Let's say once a month you get together with your friend, you go for some exercise, then you go out to have a meal. But if this is done on a routine, now this is going to negate the benefit of the exercise by throwing in junk after the exercise. All right, so now as man evolved, unfortunately what happened was that we became more and more sedentary. Now the only part of our body that became active were our fingers. Why? Because we're always using our handphone, or we are using our tablets or the computer or the laptop. All right. Now, a sedentary lifestyle is associated with an increased risk of chronic diseases, and sitting is now termed to be the new smoking. All right. So it brings about health hazards just like smoking does. All right. And regular physical activity is important. So the physical activity that we are talking about must be broken down to three components. So we want aerobic exercise, strength training, and flexibility. And flexibility is very important as a person ages. Now, why do people fall? Basically because their hip stance becomes smaller due to lack of flexibility at the hip joint. So we don't start working on this only when we get to the age where we are considered geriatric, or we can start doing this right from the time we're young. And we need to put in about 210 minutes of exercise per week, as suggested by research. Now, 210 minutes It looks like a lot, but when you break it down, it's just 40 minutes, 5 times a week, which is very doable. Okay. Now, physical activity helps to prevent chronic diseases or manage chronic diseases, such as it helps with prevention of obesity, diabetes, uh, improves your hypertension, improves mental health, and very importantly, it also boosts our immune system. Now, one study published in Exercise and Sports Science Review suggests that moderate intensity exercise decreases inflammation, improves immune function, and reduces the risk and severity of respiratory infection. And another epidemiological study has linked regular training to better immune response to respiratory pathogens, such as seasonal influenza. Now, what about stress and its implication or its role in the disease pathway? Now, we know that stress activates the neuroendocrine and the sympathetic pathways via the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis and the medullary adrenal sympathetic system. The end result of this is the production of cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. At the same time, the parasympathetic nervous system is inhibited. It also decreases serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. Our neurotransmitters are depleted as well. Then again, stress impacts the bacteria in our gut. So we have gut dysbiosis. It increases oxidative stress and inflammation. It is linked to impaired immune system, abdominal obesity, insulin resistance, impaired glucose tolerance, and more. All right. So basically, stress accelerates aging and increases the risk of physical, mental, and emotional health disorders. So how are we going to manage the stress? After all, we are also facing a stress epidemic, right? Every year, we find that stress levels are increasing. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to reset our mind, all right? So why are we resetting our mind? Because we want to clear the clutter from our mind. We want this mindful mind, that is, the mind is full of things, to become mindful, all right? So you clear the mind, declutter the mind, so you have only the necessary thoughts in your mind. So what is mindfulness actually? So mindfulness, according to Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, who is the father of mindfulness, is the psychological process of bringing a person's attention to the internal and external experience occurring in the present moment. And this mindfulness is a state. So this needs to be developed through the practice of yoga, meditation, and other forms of training. So mindfulness helps to increase stress resiliency. I mean, stress resiliency is the ability to manage stress. It downregulates the amygdala. Amygdala is the stress sensor in our brain. It decreases the production of stress hormones, inflammatory cytokines, improves our healthy gut microbiota, increases the production of neurotransmitters. Okay, how does it do that? It does that by evoking the body's relaxation response. So the body has a relaxation response, which is the body's natural counterbalance. So this kicks into action when our parasympathetic nervous system is activated. So if you recollect, when we experience stress, the sympathetic nervous system is activated or switched on. The parasympathetic nervous system is switched off. Now, what happens is that we forget to switch on the parasympathetic nervous system once the stressful situation has passed. All right. So now when we do techniques that evoke mindfulness, we are actually activating the parasympathetic nervous system and switching off the sympathetic nervous system. So it is a physical state of deep rest that changes the physical and emotional response to stress. Here, when the relaxation response is activated, breathing rate, blood pressure, heart rate all decrease, right? So it's a reverse of what happens when a person experiences stress response, and the immune system is enhanced. So when we do any technique such as yoga that brings about mindfulness, okay, so it reduces increases the heart rate variability, decreases heart rate, blood pressure, decreases the inflammatory cytokines, and at the end result of this is that you have reduced risk factors for heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, obesity, and more. Right? So some published research that shows that yoga reduces salivary cortisol levels. So yoga is an example of a technique that brings about mindfulness. Now, in another interesting study where there was a comparison between novice and expert yoga practitioners. Now, it was found that regular practice dampens stress-related changes. So you can't do a practice one day and then say, okay, now this will help me manage my stress. No, it's not going to work that way. So if you do something regularly, for example, some technique that brings about mindfulness. So here the example is yoga. Now, the novice's serum interleukin 6 was 41% higher than the expert practitioners, and the odds of a novice having a detectable CRP was 4.75 times higher. Now, other than these mindfulness techniques, all right, now the other ways that we can also manage stress, one of it being have some humor, all right, don't take things very seriously. So always laugh when you can, because laughter is the best medicine, all right. And exercise also helps to blunt the effects of stress. Doing things that a person enjoys, for example, dancing, singing, playing sports, or drawing, or listening to music, all right. So that helps you to combat your stress. And connecting with nature. Connecting with nature is a very good way of de-stressing. And not only that, if when you connect with nature and you're exposed to sunlight, okay, you get the added benefit of vitamin D being produced, of your body producing vitamin D. So what about sleep? All right. Now, sleep, if you don't get enough sleep, then a person is more likely to get sick after being exposed to a virus, because basically when you don't sleep, what happens is that it translates into the body experiencing stress, the immune system being compromised. Okay, and not only that, lack of sleep also impacts how fast you recover if you get sick. Now, other than the immune system, sleep has been shown to increase chronic stress. So lack of sleep increases cortisol. Now, a large study done by Chandler on workers who did night shift, they found that workers who did night shift continuously had increased levels of cortisol and had an increased risk of metabolic disorders. Okay. Now, moving on to social connectivity, right? So social connectivity, being connected to people, improves longevity and physiological parameters such as heart rate variability by activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So there was a very interesting study called the Harvard Grant Study. Here, they looked at Harvard male students and men from inner city Boston. So the thinking is that the Harvard male students are the privileged guys who come from well-to-do families, who are well educated, and then they'll go on to get good jobs. And these men from inner city Boston were basically the dropouts who didn't have much to their name. Now, this was a long 75-year cohort study. And what was the conclusion? The single most important predictor of happiness and longevity was social connectivity. So it was not how much money they had or what kind of education they had, but social connectivity. So being socially connected helps to improve your immune system. It helps to reduce your stress, improves mental health, reduces the risk for other ailments as well. Of course, reducing or not smoking is advised. If a person stops smoking today and 1 year down the road, all right, they will find that they've reduced the risk of heart disease by 50% by just removing smoking. And of course, alcohol in moderation, 2 drinks for men and 1 for women daily, but you cannot accumulate these drinks. So you cannot say, well, this whole week I didn't drink, so today is Friday and I've got 10 to my name, so I can take it today. No, binge drinking increases health risks, right? So let's look at a lesson from Okinawa. We all know that Okinawa, right, people age very well there. It's one of the blue zones. Here they consume a predominantly plant-based diet, all right, predominantly plant-based diet, which is rich in phytochemicals. Half of their daily calorie intake comes from sweet potato. They consume abundant green leafy vegetables and soy products, small amounts of fat. They are physically active, they are socially connected, they have low levels of stress. So they have high life expectancy, low mortality from heart disease and certain types of cancer. Now, studies have found that they are also resistant to COVID-19 mortality. So in a study published by Hanna Kailova and Neil Barnard, it was found that COVID-19 mortality in Okinawa was 0.08% as compared to 1.3% in Tokyo. So it is 1/16 of that in Tokyo. Now, just to share some studies on lifestyle changes and heart disease, and we'll talk about diabetes before we conclude today. All right. So now this Dean Ornish, most of you may know of him, right? He published this lifestyle heart trial in JAMA many years ago, and now it was one of the first trials about intensive lifestyle changes for reversing heart disease. And it was a randomized controlled trial. And the findings were that there was more regression of coronary atherosclerosis after 5 years as compared to after 1 year in the experimental group. That means after 1 year, there were changes, but the longer you adhere to it, the more regression of coronary atherosclerosis. In contrast, the control group, the atherosclerosis continued to progress and more than twice as many cardiac events occurred. Now, another of the so-called giants of lifestyle medicine would be Dr. Esselstyn. All right. Now, one of Dr. Esselstyn's earliest patients was a colleague of his, and this colleague felt unwell for some time, and they could not detect what was wrong with him. And finally, he had a myocardial infarction. And so he came to see Dr. Esselstyn because he knew he was working on something and he wanted to try everything before going through a bypass. And the angiogram showed that he had a diseased artery, and he went on Dr. Esselstyn's plant-based diet, low-fat plant-based diet. And after 32 months, it shows a regression of the stenosis. So the artery has become more patent. All right, and another study published by Esselstyn in Journal of Family Practice, he did a study on patients with coronary artery disease who had undergone some kind of some kind of intervention, either by stent or bypass, and they also had multiple comorbidities, and he did a 4-year follow-up. And those who adhered to a whole food plant-based diet, 99.4% avoided any major cardiac event, and 93% had improvement in the angina or the angina resolve. For the non-adherent participants, 62% experienced an adverse event. Okay. Now, moving on to diabetes. So there's this diabetes prevention program that was conducted and published many years ago. Now, this program focused on healthy eating and physical activity. All right. So the goals of the program was 7% loss of body weight and 150 minutes of exercise weekly. Now, they had a coach now which monitored them weekly for the first 6 months and then monthly after that. Now, the findings of this study was that people with pre-diabetes reduced the risk of developing type 2 diabetes by 58% and 71% for people over 60 years. And in another randomized controlled trial where lifestyle intervention was compared with metformin as the intervention to prevent the progression of diabetes, it was found that lifestyle intervention reduced the incidence of diabetes by 58% as compared to 31% for the metformin group. So in conclusion, all right, now the global response has been to treat COVID-19 as a vertical disease rather than addressing COVID-19 and its interaction with NCDs and poverty. Given that the interaction between COVID-19 and NCDs, it is imperative to address the underlying drivers of the NCD pandemic that are now fueling the COVID-19 mortality. Lifestyle medicine is an intervention that will help to address the drivers of the NCD pandemic and help to enhance immune function which will help us to combat COVID-19 and future pandemics. Ladies and gentlemen, stay safe and stay healthy. And before I conclude, I would like to just share with you that the second Malaysian Lifestyle Medicine Conference will be held on the 1st and 2nd of December 2022. Venue will be determined shortly, and there will be a board certification examination in lifestyle medicine on the 3rd of December 2022. If anybody is interested, you can please visit our website or contact us. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Siva, for an insightful talk. It's indeed very timely and relevant to enhance lifestyle medicine along with surviving COVID-19. So with that, due to time constraint, we will not be having a Q&A session. For all the participants who have any questions for the speaker for the last session here, you can drop an email to the conference secretariat. A friendly reminder, in order to claim your CPD points for all these lectures, kindly scan using your MMA's QR code. All right? So we hope to see you all again for tomorrow's sessions. And with that, have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.